First of all, thanks everybody for joining. Welcome to this webinar on AI adoption in law, reality versus expectation. I suppose just to give you all a small bit of background, we recently at Definedly conducted a survey on this topic. And when we came back with the results, not only did we think they were interesting, but also we had a lot of very positive feedback generally in the market on the report. So we thought actually what might be a good idea on the back of that then is to do this webinar with some industry experts. And we're very, very happy to have the people who joined us today. We've got John Crask from CMS, we've got Joe Cohen from CRS, and we have Conan Hines from Fried Frank, all of whom have been around this sector a long time and really know their stuff when it comes to actually adopting and innovating in the legal sector. So thank you, all three of you, for taking the time. For others who are joining that might not be familiar, just to let you know, the reason I'm not on camera is because I'm blind. And so with that, I think what might be a good thing to do is just let each of our guests introduce themselves. And after that, then we will actually go in then for a kind of conversational question answering. And then at the end of it, we'll also take questions from the audience. So if we'll do it in order, maybe Joe, John, Conan, if you do it in that order, please, if you could just introduce yourselves, that'd be great.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks, Feargus. So, Joe Cohen, the Director of Advanced Client Solutions at Russell Speechlys. Been at the firm 18 months. The responsibilities of the team are broadly fall into three pillars. The first two are kind of internal facing in terms of the legal tech and Gen AI side, so not just the Gen AI capabilities and the good overall adoption that we've got at the moment, but the rest of the legal tech portfolio, including Definedly and other platforms, embedding in terms of the legal delivery. The next bit is legal project management. The chargeable but non-legal side of matters, team of legal project managers, and then the flip side is the external, team of product software developers, graphic designers, testers to start to build our own SaaS platform for the firm, which is very exciting. And yeah, over to you, John.
Great, thanks, Joe. Hi, everyone. I'm John, and I'm Chief Innovation and Knowledge Officer at CMS. So my job and my team's jobs are really all about working with our clients and with our lawyers on how we deliver our work. So all of the things that Joe said, I think when we were chatting in the prep, I said all the things Joe said minus the dev team, but plus knowledge. So that's so I won't repeat all the things that Joe said. I think it's super exciting to be in this space and be thinking about how we can best adopt tech, best use it to deliver our services and the best services we can for our clients. I think I'll leave it there and hand on to Conan.
Yeah, thanks, John. Conan Hines with Fried Frank, Director of Practice Innovation. I've, just like Joe, been there about 18 months and also have three components, toying with some of the names still, but kind of have a practice improvement team. We take on the big innovation projects. So they're kind of like business analysts, project manager, specialists for legal work. And then we have a practice technology team, which covers anything, whether we build or buy, that's going to touch our users. And so that can be tools like Definedly, or it can be some AI app we've developed, which leads to the third team, which is an engineering team, practice engineering, to see the benefits of Gen AI. I'll turn it back to you, Feargus.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. So I think, look, there's probably four main topics I wanted to probably discuss, and we can see how the conversation takes us. But, a couple of the things that really stood out for me was kind of the satisfaction and preparedness statistic between, looking at people from over in the US and people from the UK, where you're saying 51% are satisfied versus 23%. And then you have, 43% in the US, in the UK saying that they feel prepared versus 53%, I think it was, That was one aspect I wanted to touch on. The second aspect is use cases, like what you all see as being appropriate, good use cases, maybe, broad versus narrow, or how you see it best being utilized within your practices, and if you can touch on also, you know, the differences in what you see between kind of the idea between in-house and law firms. I think the third topic then is going to be around kind of trust. Like the statistic on trust, I actually thought was very interesting, where 55% were saying that they didn't really trust it, you know. And then finally also kind of that kind of process barriers to entry, you know, security, privacy, confidentiality, those numbers still actually I thought were very high in terms of both sides of the ocean were over 50%. So just to try to give people a sense of what we're going to be talking about. So like to kind of roll into the first point, I think, you know, I'll probably start with you, Conan, if you don't mind. You know, in terms of that, you know, when I saw those numbers, like what went off in my head was I was kind of thinking, is it cultural? Is it strategic? Is it budget? Like, why do we think there's such a high difference in terms of how people feel in terms of satisfaction with AI adoption and preparedness for AI adoption? I was wondering if you had any kind of sense of that, like how things work in the States and whatnot.
Yeah, and I was fortunate enough before Fried Frank to work at Clifford Chance, so I feel like I have a sense of the differences in culture. I mean, I don't think this is a Gen AI thing. I mean, my experience has been the UK market has been more progressive, and I think the I'm trying to choose my words because there's some things maybe I shouldn't say live, but I think there are more pressures from clients. I guess what I was going to say is I think there's just more of an appreciation for sort of the business of law in the UK, and you know, we're kind of a little bit more Wild West in a way, and kind of our American cowboy identity kind of plays in the legal space as well. And you know, the people who procure legal services, you know, a lot of them were on the other side. So I think that culture just permeates into the client side of things, and things sort of stay status quo. And I guess the thing I was holding back on saying, but I you know, I think there's just a different perspective on what a lawyer is in the different regions. And I think it's maybe sort of elevated a little bit more in the US, maybe not justifiably, but there's sort of this awe and you know, around a lawyer. You go to school for probably way too long, and and you
Yeah. But do you think,
that,
sorry,
yeah.
Con. No, I was going to ask you, like, do you think, like, in terms of culture, like, so, like, I'm married 20 years in June. My wife's from California. Like, her four brothers, they all have their own business, you know, and they're all very kind of seize the opportunity. And if there's something they see that they think is going to bring them efficiency, they'll pursue it. But they will also get rid of it equally as quick if they feel it's not worth it. Like, do you think kind of maybe the attitude is kind of they're much more willing to throw money at a problem and see if it works, and if it doesn't, move on?
On the US side or the
Yeah,
UK side?
on the US side.
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, you know, it maybe sounds a little negative, but I mean, successful lawyers are entrepreneurial. I mean, they're business-minded people. I think the people who really make hay for the firms are actually very open to creative ways to delivering services to clients. So, but yeah, you really have to. I mean, this model has worked for a very long time. I mean, you don't get a large window to convince people to change the way they're doing things when you know, on paper, it seems like, well, what are you talking about? Things are going great.
Yeah, nice. And John, what about your sense of like the UK? Like, I know obviously, I think I don't know. Does CMS have a base in the US as well? Do you? Or
No, CMS is international, but actually not so much in the US, pretty much everywhere else. I thought this was one of the interesting things in the report as well. And when you first see sort of satisfaction with legal tech in the UK, 22% of people being satisfied, that's pretty low, isn't it? And it makes you think clearly there's some things that to be done there.
yeah,
Whatever those things are, there's some things to be done. Whether that's better products, but actually I also think it comes down to what Conan was saying around culture as well. And you know, there's quite a lot of people, I think lawyers in particular, who expect to be told what they should be doing with the tech rather than going out and finding out, you're going to come onto use cases, and I'm going to say the same thing then, I think. But rather than going out and finding and exploring what those use cases are in that sort of pioneering way that Conan was hinting at, I think there's a bit of that. The people need to take some responsibility themselves for it. The tools are only going to be the tools, right? And so I think, but I was really intrigued by the findings.
And when you said it there back to me, actually, I don't know why it flashed on my mind. It just made me think of something too. And I wonder, like, and maybe it is partly cultural. Like, is there an expectation level maybe in the UK versus the US that, like, maybe attorneys, solicitors in the UK have a different sense of expectation in terms of what it should deliver for them to be satisfied?
Well, and what their role in that, in terms of what it should deliver, I think, and that it is as well. And one thing I was going to add was, I think the one thing that, and I'm interested in Joe's view on this as well, one thing that we've really seen differently in terms of adoption is with Gen AI stuff. We were fortunate to be very early on in the Copilot early access program. We've publicly been said about what we'd done with Harvey, and for example, and we've had a queue out of the door with people wanting to get onto and use this stuff, when for other legal tech tools it's sometimes been a challenge. And so that even getting people to the point when they want to try it and use it and stuff. So I'm not saying there's not still work to do, and we don't still get questions every minute of every day around use cases and such like, but we've had a lot of success in terms of getting people engaged and interested in it, which has been different from almost anything I've seen before. But yeah, I'm interested in what Joe thinks too.
Yeah, it's interesting actually. I mean, it kind of takes me back to the beginning of COVID, where suddenly everybody wanted a DocuSign license. Do you know what I mean? And then it was like, and beforehand nobody did for some strange reason. But then overnight, suddenly this is the thing that everybody needs. And why is it? Obviously that was due to necessity. And I think that people see AI now also as necessity. Whereas perhaps previous iterations of the pre-transform architecture AI, if we want to call it that, probably wasn't delivering the results that people had anticipated. So there were obviously multiple products out there, and we will have been rolling them out for post 2016, post 2017 for a few years, and to be honest, it was sometimes a little bit of a struggle, but it's not really, well, at least for us, not really so much of a struggle anymore. Maybe to get to 100% adoption is quite tough, but to get up to the 70-75% monthly active user figures, which is, for us, that's a good 750-800 people using it every month, multiple times, confident in their own use cases, I would say actually it has obviously been challenging in different ways, but actually we haven't had to push really, really hard at that door.
Do you have any sense of what the flip switcher was, Joe? Like what flipped the switch then? Is it just generational, like younger attorneys coming in and they just want to use it, like, or they know, like, any sense of what you think might have flipped that switch on adoption?
It really is the quality. I think the quality of the responses and the flexible nature of the platforms is the piece that actually allows people to make it relevant to them. And previously, a lot of the AI before that was extraction, clause extraction. If you're in-house, it was going to be around potentially a little bit of redlining, maybe trying to create clause library, but it was more of a struggle. The use cases were certainly not flexible, but also the accuracy wasn't as high. But here we're talking about quite complex content generation, and almost it's capable enough for the lawyer to appreciate it, but then also to see their own role in how to use it. Like, they're still very much relevant, very much in the loop, in control of how to use it. And I think eventually that might change. There might be things that become more automated than they are today, and that we might cross that bridge later. We might even discuss it as part of this webinar. But I would say that the main flip switch really was just the ChatGPT, the APIs behind it, plugging that into various platforms, allowing the access of it. So the way that we did our rollout, so here at my previous firm, we did almost no definition of use cases before the rollouts. We did testing of the products to make sure they worked and they didn't crash. And we did a lot on, load balancing and that kind of stuff to make sure that they could handle multiple hundreds of queries a minute. But we did not do any work on, here are the 10 things you should use it for, the 50 things, here are the prompts, nothing. Because,
Really?
yeah, because my view is that you almost shouldn't do that, particularly when there was very little guidance available at that time. It was all very high level. You use it for drafting. Okay, what kind of drafting? In what context? What's going to be the backing data of that? So no, we just said, we did a short demo sessions of, here's basically how to use the platform. Here's a couple of examples. Please use it for anything that you see fit. And we had some caveats around, you have to check it and make sure you can use it on particular client stuff, and don't use these very certain types of data, either more sensitive data and health. Don't put any of that in there. But generally speaking, go, and then you circle back after a couple of months and you say, okay, so what's everyone using it for? And then you start to gather the prompts. You can get the trainees involved to start to document the best use cases, share those. That's because to do that in advance before people actually use it's very difficult, and for me just would have been a waste of time. Now is a bit different because there is a lot of case studies and just commentary on the detail of the use cases, but I think at that point that's how we did anyway.
That's so interesting.
We still see, don't we, a little bit of a sort of Mexican standoff about use cases. Like, you show me your use cases, that sort of stuff. It's a little bit strange. The sort of flip switch. The one thing I was going to add was, most other tech that we've seen before would require the user to change what they did or the way they did it to get the best out of it. Whereas now what we're seeing is stuff that kind of fits into and helps the user, rather than a platform that they have to go to and changing the way they operate. And those things were always okay where you had a lot of things to do, an e-discovery platform where you have a million things, bits of evidence you need to review, or a contract repapering when you need to do some diligence on 10,000 things or whatever, because there was no practical way of doing that without the tech. But they still require you to operate differently from how we might have done.
Yeah, so it allows you to kind of sit in the flow of the work that you're already doing.
As Joe was saying, people get to use it the way they want to use it. And that, I think, that and the hype around it in the market generally, right? So it just went massive on everywhere in consumer, and everyone was using it to make up songs and write recipes and suggest holiday destinations at the same time. So they wanted to try that at work. And so those two things came together, I think.
Which I think actually, in fairness, it's a really nice segue into that kind of second kind of, it's a nice bridge into that second topic of use cases, kind of. I remember Namdi, co-founder, CEO, saying to me before, the difference between a Swiss Army knife and a scalpel, I was just really interested to know, in terms of, what you see as like the best use cases, or what you've seen in terms of like, the best use cases where Gen AI has been applied, has it been in that kind of Swiss Army knife scenario, shall we say, where it's a multi-purpose, multi-tool, can do some summarization, can help you do some drafting, etc., answer queries, or in a very kind of niche way, for like different practice groups obviously have different workflows, if I'm working capital markets in New York and filing with the SEC as opposed to the UK, LA and London, I'm going to have a different, workflow that you might not necessarily get from a generalist application or tool. So I'd like to hand that over, maybe start with you, Joe, and then move on to Conan and John.
What's my favorite use case? So, I mean, we've built some fairly complicated ones ourselves in the platform that we've got. Typically they are kind of complex contract reporting. I mean, we're also, as I mentioned at the beginning, developing our own software, which is prompt driven, although the users won't be able to generate their own prompts. So a lot of it is kind of happening in the background. That's interesting. But I'd say at the favorite use cases, and we're kind of migrating platforms at the moment, or part of that project. The ones that impress me the most, I think, at the moment are as you say, the ones that are kind of multifaceted. So, for example, particularly the products that have got, can go from the case law to analyzing documents, mapping them to the actual underlying legislation, looking for merits, then do your chronology, and then it will, link back everything. And it just, it's not just the generative AI at that point. There's thought that's gone into what is going to be actually useful, what is the lawyer actually doing, trying to take it to the next level, because generative AI, can do the analysis, but you have to point in the right direction. And I think these are the products I think are going to really thrive, and will probably stand to be the I think predominantly some of the winners out of what the power of this technology.
Interesting. Conan?
Yeah, one we've focused heavily on is, and I think it's quite ubiquitous. I think pretty much any practice can benefit from preserving and recalling of knowledge, but not just knowledge, the advice we've given to clients. And sometimes that's in a document, sometimes that's in an email, sometimes it's a document that's compiled a bunch of emails and in some sort of compendium. And today, most clients don't have a great document management system, and the friction caused by years down the road saying, what did you tell us about this, or what happened in this deal, what was the term, and the amount of then time where someone on our side would have to stop what they're doing, go find that information, and on the client side they probably already tried to find it, and it's beyond AI. I mean, AI is going to be hooked in, but it's just a more digital delivery and preservation of legal advice. I think that is something that probably should have predated AI, and in some ways we do that with extranets, but I think if you have, as Joe kind of mentioned, if you have some thought around how you ground this data, the AI is very, very accurate if done right. And I know, there's probably a little risk, or maybe more than a little, in the minds of lawyers when we're thinking of clients accessing a platform we have, and there's an AI in it to help recall something we've already told them. But I think it's actually more attainable than if you really know what you're doing and if you've seen it at work. So that's something that I, as just a strategic pillar of ours, want to see us do and more of for clients and invest in.
So you're like, how do we use it to leverage the knowledge that's already sitting in our store, kind of, in terms of memos that have been drafted in the past, previous email advice, etc., to client? Like, how can you just leverage that? Is that
Yeah, I'll give you a even more specific example. So we're a big asset management shop, and we have lots of investor queries, and from fund to fund, we want to know what our position has been on certain of these requests, and they can live in various documents or email conversations, and being able to today having to find that, again, not really a high value task for the client. Being able to say, okay, we know exactly what we've given in this context before. The AI is very good at looking at a question and knowing what conceptually is being asked, and going back into a database, finding the historical question and surfacing that up, and being able to cite right to the spot in that source data. We're seeing that, we're using it for clients, and it's the lawyers love it.
Interesting. And John, yourself, what kind of, like, are you seeing a more broad application, or do you see like a use case and like very narrow kind of applications as well?
In the way I've been describing it to people here is, I see it as a portfolio, right? Ultimately, AI is a technology, a type of technology, and so you can, we'll all need a portfolio of different types of tools. Is there space for sort of multi-purpose tools that can just be an assistant and help with queries? Is there space for sort of knowledge management, research tools? Is there space for more surgical things in specific lines of work, or toolkits that let you build workflows for specific types of work? So the answer is yes to all of those things, I think. So, and it doesn't, and just because it relies on some of the same underlying technology doesn't mean they're not absolutely valid. I mean, and I think, you know, there's some huge opportunities for us as an industry. So if we just imagine for a minute, and this is a world that Definely is in, right, as well, in terms of contracts and documents. Imagine the whole universe of contracts, even inside one organization. What percentage of those contracts ever make their way to the legal team? And then of the contracts that make their way to the legal team, what percentage of those contracts make their way to an external law firm? And actually, there's a huge opportunity to serve a sort of unmet legal demand to reduce contracting risk in organizations as well. So as well as, you know, making things more efficient. So I think contracting and supporting the sort of whole contracting work stream is an obvious area, and that can be supported with both general purpose tools and very specific tools that might have workflows or playbooks or whatever as part of the way that they work. And then that can apply into much more specific niche areas, whatever those practice areas or types of work are. I'll just finish with one other non-contracting example, though, that I was really I remember the first time I saw sort of the first generation of AI stuff and got excited, the sort of pre-transformer model stuff that Joe was talking about. But more recently, sort of application of Gen AI to e-discovery and the first pass review process, which is, you know, and what that can do, and doing it in a way that not only finds your relevant documents, but just almost then queries itself and justifies why it's found that thing, is you know, and being able to do that, and I think will change the way we use that sort of technology and the way we do discovery, because now all of a sudden you can do that as part of your case strategy development and not just as a painful discovery exercise, disclosure exercise. So I think things like that and are really exciting. So I'll finish with a real one.
I think that's interesting. It's kind of like that kind of like reduce the toil, you know.
And Joe was going to come in and
sorry, Joe.
So yeah, I mean, so I think the discovery point is an interesting one, and actually that takes us back to right at the beginning, which was that, you know, some of the differences to the States and the UK is that I think I mean, it's definitely converged a lot over the last year or so, but historically, UK law firms, probably starting from around 10 years ago, started to build up innovation functions, you know, getting their portfolio of legal technology platforms together. And the US firms didn't as much. The one main area of difference being in the litigation e-discovery, where, you know, they are world class, like even now streets ahead of UK firms, just to the massive quantity of discovery that US law firms have to get through and do and just operate in. But yeah, on the impact, I think, of that kind of technology today, I think is probably for me one of the key areas where I am a bit concerned that the effectiveness of the technology, you know, you look at the L1 Airs, you look at the Discos, and you see the platforms, the impact, I think, on the first level review, I think is quite profound. And the firms that do have, you know, that do a lot of that type of work and are quite paralegal driven, I think that there might be very well a rebalancing there, and it may be a bit steeper than they might be comfortable with, but
yeah,
we'll see.
Yeah, but then, you know, I guess actually, again, Joe, thank you. Another nice segue into the next point, which is actually, you know, what I wanted to talk about is the trust, knowledge, and skills kind of piece, you know, because if it's doing the doing, who's doing the learning, you know? Like when I looked at the report here, I kind of saw, you know, there's like something in the region of 55% or something of people said they don't really necessarily trust the output, you know? And it kind of made me think, these kind of like, there's kind of like the AI faithful, and then there's the AI like non-believers to some degree, the people who are just always going to be doubtful of the answer. And my worry, I suppose, maybe with the people who are kind of like the AI faithful is that they become over-reliant. If something's right 99 times that you've looked at it, there's going to be the one time you don't check, It's like, I'm just wondering, like, in terms of like knowledge training and skills generation, if we build these tools in a way that becomes so good at producing output, where is the legal reasoning, knowledge, and learning being done, and how do we potentially address that? Because I suppose, you think like a lawyer for a reason. It takes time to learn that. And I was just wondering, John, maybe, and then Joe Conan, like if you've got thoughts on that kind of aspect of what these tools are bringing to the table for people.
I love how on the most difficult question I get to go first, and that's fine. But thank you for that. I mean, I think this is a key thing and something that we have we've started grappling with and thinking about. So I think if we're not careful, we're going to have some skills gaps, and of course we all need to be literate with the technology and what it does. And I can see some questions coming in, so we might turn to some of those in a minute. And I think, let's take a situation. If previously you learned about how to negotiate contracts and consider contracts by essentially reading a lot of them, then you maybe are not going to read a lot of them or as many of them in the future. But we still need people with the same sorts of skills. So how do we develop those skills in the future? And I think we as an industry and as firms need to start experimenting with how we close those skills gaps, pretty much right now. And there's some interesting things going on. Joe posted about this on LinkedIn just the end of last week. I'm sure he'll talk about that in a mo. But I think that's a really important thing, and because we do need to build the next generation of lawyers and how they're going to add value and use those reasoning skills on top. Because I think we're going to still be in this human plus machine world for a long time. That's one of my mantras I keep repeating. I think we're not going to get away from that. One of the early things that I read on AI, there was a study that Harvard Business School did with the Boston Consulting Group. It was called Navigating the Jagged Edge of AI or something like that. And it was a fascinating study. And there was like an appendix 3. It talked about this thing that they accounted to in the study, which is the different modes of operation that people had when using AI, and whether they described them as centaurs and cyborgs, which are different versions of your faithful and the other ones, Feargus. And really what they meant was, if you're going to behave like a centaur, i.e. you're just going to delegate a task to the AI and expect it to come back and for it to be accurate, then that's obviously needs to be in an area where the AI is very capable, highly tested, and you can trust it, and at least error rates are the same as or better than human error rates, right? So it needs to be, you can't be right on the frontier there. But if instead you operate more like a cyborg, so you're using the AI as an assistant to help you do your work, then it doesn't matter so much that it's 100% accurate all the time, because you're using it as an assistant. You know that it's not going to get it right all the time, and whatever domain or task or thing you're doing it with. So, and we need to be able to shift between those different modes of operation depending on the tool we're using and how we're using it. And so just developing that sort of cognition around being able to think like that and picking the right tool for the job, which is no different with any other tool, right? But understanding the capabilities of that tool and what it's good at, it has been. I made a really big mistake when we were first introducing sort of machine learning AI, and in a particular practice group, which I won't mention, and I kind of allowed it to become a competition, where the practice group did a test of the AI thing we were using. This is years ago, and then they were like, "Aha! Our humans found things that the AI didn't. Therefore, the AI is rubbish. Therefore, everything the AI does is rubbish. Therefore, we're not using it."
That's interesting.
I think we've moved on from that, right? But we mustn't allow ourselves to think this is a competition, because if the way people talk about hallucinations like it's getting something wrong, the whole way that the transformer model works is designed to do it this way. It's doing exactly what it's designed to do, and we can do lots of things to minimize that stuff, but we just need to work with it and understand it like any other tool. But that sort of mode of depending on where you are in terms of the frontier
but that's cyborg
capability, the cyborg versus centaur thing is an interesting thing to think about.
It's very interesting, but when I think of the cyborg, and Joe, maybe you can go on with this too. Like when I think of that cyborg element, I still think you need to be that kind of healthy skeptic. You need to have the knowledge to know, like for example, I can read an output that I'm given, let's say if it was ChatGPT, Gemini, whatever it is, and I can look at that output and I'll have a sense of actually, that kind of just feels a bit off from what I remember in the contract or whatever it is, and it's like how we develop that reasoning, Joe.
It is interesting actually, to your point, John, around I found a mistake, therefore it's completely useless. I mean, I think the stats show that the AI is more accurate than the human in most things. So the Val's reports show, I mean, neither are perfect, but the AI is either roughly on par or better for most things. In other disciplines, the O3 mini high GPT is the 158th best coder in the world, at the World Coding Championship. Is it number one? No, but do you need to necessarily be number one? What's more important to you? 100% accuracy, which over multiple tasks a human won't achieve anyway, or speed, which certainly you're not going to have any human that's going to be acting faster than the AI for most tasks. Obviously, there'll be some things that AI cannot do and therefore cannot do quickly. So I think it's worth considering, and then ultimately, is it possible that there might be some kind of industry insurer decision on, a bit like how in the States, I think how it works with real estate titles is that they do have real estate title documents, but they are not reviewed. They are just insured upon in bulk. And obviously in England and Wales and Scotland, we have this concept of reviewing the titles for potential missteps, and that's part of that industry. Obviously the model in the States is nothing to do with AI, but there's that possibility of, okay, we can just assume that the AI's reviewed the documents, they look fine. There'll be some errors in there, but instead of paying for all of them to be reviewed manually, which may not find the things that AI has missed, then we can just insure against the whole thing. So, and I think I'll talk about the AI, my views on supervision in a second. But I've been reading Richard Susskind's new book, and it's quite useful to start to conduct thought experiments with yourselves or with your teams, what the future might look like, by almost assuming, trying to imagine the maximum capability of the AI in X number of years, and then working backwards. It's like, okay, well, if the AI can do these things, right? So then, what would the world look like if that? Where's my role in it? What will it be able to do? What won't it be able to do if I go to the extreme, and then almost work backwards and say, does the process change? Does the scenario change? But I'll just, I suppose, bring it back to the learning point, Fergus. You meant talking about how do we ensure that well, actually, John, you're saying before, if you're learning through osmosis of reading multiple hundreds of contracts and you're not doing that anymore, then how are you learning? So I certainly don't have the answer to that question. But the thing that I posted on LinkedIn last week, and it's something that some providers subsequently reached out to me, say that they're doing it, we're taking a look, we're asking the providers that we're looking at to replace our current AI system, that they want to build this for us. The concept is so let's say you're a junior lawyer, you go into the platform, you ask it to maybe draft you a clause or draft you a memo or something, and then the idea is that as a junior lawyer maybe didn't have that much experience, you would then have to verify the information. So how do you do that? Go to other sources, go to colleagues, think about it, do other research, ultimately then change it as necessary, and then give it to your supervisor. Let's say that was the process. the idea is, could you insert an AI tutor in between the
Interesting.
giving to the supervisor? Because what the tutor could then do is say, okay, right, I've given you this memo. Now I'm going to ask you some questions about the content of the memo, and then, you know, test your understanding almost. And so those could be free text, they could even potentially be multiple choice, there could be a little decision tree. I mean, the AI tutor would have to be able to do this on the fly, which is not necessarily so easy, although experience tells me that's probably possible and would be quite high value, because ultimately you could then see whether actually the lawyer in question understands what was being generated and therefore is learning. You know, they might have to do research in order to even answer those questions, but if the point is we understand that this is not necessarily the most efficient way of doing it, because obviously this answering these questions takes time, but at least we get to introduce some elements of learning. You know, they could then even go through that with the supervisor. Supervisor might have different questions. But I think there are, it's a little bit like the concept of a lot of the tools nowadays. You know, you want it, you plug in a request, and maybe you want it to produce a lease report or some other contract report. They'll use multiple models to check answers. So, you know, there'll be a particular looking for a break provision. You know, they might use GPT to give some analysis, and then they'll feed the answer into, let's say, a Gemini to see whether a different model actually finds it correct or reasonable, whether it's got concerns, and then you can even feed a different model. And then basically it's an extra stage of right. So there are things you can artificially do to increase quality, and I think a lot of it is when you take it as a whole. You know, I think there are lots.
Do you
of
see a tool
available.
like that, Joe, being something that you use continuously through your career? So like it can almost adapt itself to knowing what questions to ask a mid-level, to know that a mid-level is sufficiently knowledgeable at that stage, or something maybe at the end of each quarter based on the transactions you've done, that you're almost like given almost like a quiz, a knowledge quiz kind of thing. I don't know. Yeah.
It's certainly not a fully scoped idea, but one of the people commented on my post actually that was quite insightful, that actually it's very possible that far from AI limiting the learning that is available to our you know, up and coming lawyers, it could actually be that AI will provide a much better learning experience for those lawyers, because it can be fully tailored to their experience levels, to the types of things they're interested in, and it's obviously on demand. So yes, that there is if we do nothing, then yes, there is a potential there for people to just be parroting stuff that comes out there, and that's quite dangerous. I don't think anybody wants that. But on the flip side, there are lots of opportunities there as long as they're grasped properly.
Yeah, and Conan, yourself, how do you feel about it? You know, in terms of knowledge, skills, reasoning, all of those things. Because when 55% are saying they don't trust it, they must have the knowledge to either know that it's being wrong or whatever. But you've got a whole generation of people that are just going to be taking these tools from day one.
Yeah, I mean, if anybody relying on it, consistently is probably going to be found out. And if you can't challenge it, then you're in over your head with an AI response. So, I mean, I posted something, was it yesterday or the day before? And I just created a very simple graph where the more legal experience you have, the better you're going to be able to use AI for research. And it was good discussion in the threads, and people had some good points on I think it was mostly supportive of that, because if you're a seasoned lawyer, you know what to check for. You've done it before, but how do the lawyers of the future get there? And one of the challenges is with that, you know, let's take a due diligence exercise. Today you're reading through all those contracts, and you're billing for that time. The AI simulation world, where we train, which I think could actually be very fruitful and advantageous and a better way to train, is not likely going to fit into the same billable model as before. So how do we express the value of that training in a revenue generating way? So that's going to be a challenge that we're going to have to figure out. But I was sitting with a senior associate yesterday, and we were talking about a due diligence tool. She's a very big advocate of it, and in her opinion, it's training the lawyers even better, because it's actually not. I mean, again, if you're relying on it to make judgment calls, that's probably not the right approach. But if you're cutting out, a lot of control Fing and a lot of copy pasting, and you can surface the information more quickly in one respect, aren't you going to learn faster, and aren't you going to get up to speed more quickly? So I think the leverage model is in the crosshairs of AI. That doesn't mean the revenue has to sink down with it, but it is sort of a new approach of how we need to train these models. And I think this is another clear difference between the two regions. I mean, and I much more prefer the UK model, where you go to school for what is it, 5 years, and then you have 2 years.
Yeah, usually 4 and 2. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
And then you're training for 2 years, and you're not qualified, and you're apprenticing, and you're making you're making money, right? You're not making the money you are as a qualified lawyer, and you're training that way. I think the US really has to look hard at that, but with big academia, I don't know how that plays out. We're going to 7 years. You're in, a lot of people are in a lot of debt. They the jobs in big law at the top of the scale are very high. So that's obviously a way to weather that debt. But that's just the big law people. I mean, and that's I know that's where we all live, but that's just a fraction of the reality among other lawyers. So and right, and the cost of an associate is not recouped until what, year 3 plus. So and you lose a lot of those people too before you hit that. So I mean, this is kind of all coming to a head, and we got rid of the apprentice model throughout the years in this country, and I think there's got to be a way to bring it back where don't take on the debt, take on a lower salary, train,
interesting,
and then qualify and come in. So the UK is very well set up to embrace AI and figure out how to bring it to bear without absorbing the cost and overhead that we do in the US.
Interesting.
I was going to one quick thing. We could get really deep, couldn't we, into sort of other impacts and on business model and pricing and such like, Conan. You're absolutely right, but I think it just requires some grown-up discussions about value, because of course, if we can be more efficient, then clients should expect things to be done for less cost. But of course, if we're training lawyers for the future to work at the firm and to work in in-house teams, the cost of all those lawyers and that training is still in the firm, and the cost of the tech tools that we're having is coming in as well. So there's all sorts of pulls and pushes in that space. And I just you're right, but it's not about greedy law firms, though, I think is the kind of point I want to make. It's not about profiteering and protecting revenue.
No,
it's about having grown-up conversations about value and price.
And John, because like the example is, today you deliver services, you're billing for those services. What happens if you go into the lab and you work a long time, not in a billable way, and then you come out and then you can, I mean, obviously this is a little sci-fi, but you hit the button, and that button in 1 second produces, and that kills the billable model because you've made zero money pretty much on that. Yet you can only push the button because you toiled for hours and weeks and months in the lab to create that bot, or whatever we want to call it. And
it's not much different to pharma, is it, Conan? Like where, the amount of R&D that gets sunk into research to produce a pharmaceutical, like how much more money
and those pharmaceuticals cost, they're very expensive, a lot of those when they first come to market, because there's a lot of other failed R&D that didn't make it, right? So it's not just even about that drug and the value that drug has, it's about everything that's done across the board.
Exactly. I'm conscious that there might be time for some questions left. Like there's other things on my mind, but you know, I'm gonna leave the floor open. Matt or Chris, if there's anybody that has raised any questions.
Yeah, let's do it. I'll read out Wendy's question. Wendy asked or said, to me, talking about AI is like talking about word processing 30 years ago. It is a functionality that can be an essential part of specific solutions for specific use cases, but not a solution on its own. What does the panel think of this analogy? Am I seeing it totally wrong? So open that to the floor. Conan, do you want to give us your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm trying to find the question here, but I don't see it in the Q&A.
It's in the
It's
chat.
in the chat one.
Oh,
Yeah.
there we go. Okay. Yeah, no, I mean, I think Wendy's on the right track. I mean, there's a lot of things. I mean, if you think about redlining, I mean, just imagine manual redlining to today's where you're hitting a button and it's doing it within seconds for you. That's a massive disruption. We wrote letters to each other. We sent letters, not but a few decades ago. Then email came in, and or even the fax machine would have been quite disruptive to that, whenever that came in, 50, 60 years ago. So, and there are some people that still use it today. That's
You
real
remind
life.
me of an old partner I used to work with, Conan, like he talked about back in the 80s when he started at A&O,
Yeah, I mean, they're still in process. Our IT department definitely supports maybe a fax machine or two today. So and that's what I think. It's a different type of phenomenon, something that we really haven't seen before. But from the disruptive aspect, I think it's not going to be that much more disruptive, at least for the next few years, until people really get their data together and really start being able to scale AI across their knowledge assets. But it's going to be quite disruptive. But I think we've seen it before, and law firms always seem to make it through, most of them unscathed.
I mean, I think, sorry, Joe, I think I'll just add a very brief answer. I think it's an underlying new technology, not an application in its own right, but that because of the underlying technology, you can create new applications. So the technology isn't ChatGPT. The technology is the general purpose transformer that is underneath it, and then GPT is an application that's written on top of it. And I think we're just starting to see AI capabilities in both new applications, which might be chatbots, but also embedded in other things and that we create as part of things. So I think it's the underlying technology, but it allows you to do both. Sorry, Joe.
Yeah. I personally, I think that this technology is unlike others that have come before it. So the word example is an interesting one because it was quite revolutionary. Okay, so if you think about pre-word processing, you've got a contract and it was either potentially on a typewriter, or let's just say it was handwritten. If you're marking up that contract, be quite discerning as to what changes you make, right? Because someone's going to have to write it again from scratch. So you're probably going to be a bit more careful as to what changes you're actually going to make. And suddenly with word processing, particularly Microsoft Word, similar technologies, these changes get infinitely easier to make. And lo and behold, what you see over the years is contracts get a lot longer, negotiations get a lot more into the detail of particular wording, because making the changes is much quicker and less onerous to actually do it. So I think that itself was quite revolutionary. I'm not sure it's a good comparison though, because ultimately the knowledge task, the real thinking of the task, still remain with the human. And I think what we're saying here is that it's actually the knowledge and the thinking that's being disrupted here, whether those actions, that brain power needs to remain with the human. And I think at the moment, I think we can all agree that it does. But it depends how far out you want to look and the trajectory that you're seeing of the technology. So I would probably say, in my mind, it's a bit different.
Interesting. Yeah.
Awesome.
I think there's
we,
another question that came in there.
yeah,
Was it about
we've probably got
workforce?
time for one more from Natalie. I think due to the time, you guys can all see that, right? John, would you like to tackle this one? How do you foresee workforce structures evolving over the next 3 to 5 years, particularly in law firms that traditionally follow a pyramid model? Oh, sorry, John, you're on mute at the moment.
Thank you. Probably best. We needed a whole new webinar on that, I think. Listen, I think it's just, we're going to have to wait and see. It's not as simple as saying, it can't be a pyramid, because where do our future lawyers come from? Future experienced lawyers that we're going to need. So it cannot be anything other than at least some sort of pyramid, even if it's got steeper sides. I think how we plan and manage and use our workforce is likely to evolve, in line also actually with the way that we need to be able to train people. I think that this is my view rather than a firm view, but I think probably we specialize our lawyers too quickly as an industry. And when actually, if you're training to be a doctor, you have to do much more general stuff for a longer period of time before you become a brain surgeon. That's at the end, not at the beginning. You don't go 3 years in or your apprenticeship and then go, right, I'm going to join the brain surgery team. It just doesn't work like that. So I think there are going to be some changes that evolve over time, partly because we need to be able to develop and help our people, and also the way we have to, economically manage our firms. But I don't think it can't be less than a pyramid, unless as a firm you're going to try and laterally hire lots of people, and let other firms train them. But that doesn't work on a mass scale. We can't all do that. So we're not going to get away from it being a pyramid, even if the pyramid has steeper sides, I think.
I wonder if I could add to kind of extrapolate from my previous answer to say, if the word processor enabled us to write and manage and negotiate significantly longer contracts with more iterations and ultimately get closer to what, both sides can agree on, as opposed to previously being limited by not wanting to have to repeatedly rewrite manually from scratch. Okay, so is it possible that generative AI, or whatever next phase of AI is going to be, allows us to just do a lot more work in total? I don't mean work longer hours. I mean just get through a lot more. So if you look at so you're right, it's the volume. So if you look at most general counsel functions, if you ask them what they do, that generally speaking, they will talk about firefighting, and they'll talk about, there'll be some strategic stuff in there, but there'll be a lot of stuff that's on their lists that never really get to look in because it would take too much time, or and they said they don't have the resource, or there's just too much firefighting to do. And I suppose the idea here is that more of that type of work, the proactive, risk avoidance, kind of constant auditing, compliance kind of stuff that they would like to do, it will become available to actually be done. And I think the idea there is that once firms have rebalanced and the technology, let's say, stabilizes, if that ever does happen, I do think that it's possible that we'll still just have a similar amount of lawyers. It will still be a burgeoning profession. It's just the volume that we can get through will increase. That's my optimistic take on it.
And as I think I mentioned before, that if we imagine the universe of contracts, it means we can actually support a much wider range of stakeholders and help clients and organizations do better and reduce contracting risk and all sorts of other things that we just can't do because it's not, exactly as Joe said, it's not economic or sensible to do it at the moment.
And that's a trend. And back to the word processing, as Joe was mentioning, I mean, was it the word processing that, contracts are longer than they've ever been. They continue to get longer. more deals get done, more M&A transactions. The trends go up. They will continue to go up. We'll continue to do more. The lawyers will not be going home at 7 p.m. at night. That's a fallacy that we get sold with legal tech, because the work will come in, more work will get done, clients will get more, have more to do. And yeah, it'll be a different way. It'll be a different world, but the amount of knowledge crunching is just going to continue to increase.
Yeah. And I think that brings us almost exactly to the hour, does it, Matt?
That is
Timing.
correct. Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Perfect. Well, listen, guys, everybody, you know, audience included, thank you very much for joining. Joe, John, Conan, it was a real pleasure, you know. Very insightful, and I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I did. You know, it's always like I could spend a long time talking to folks like you from the position that you work in. You know, so it's been a real pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. Cheers.